Morning, everyone. My name's Cam McMillan. I'm a president and co-founder of the Headhunters. Thank you so much for trusting the Headhunters and Granted Consulting with your valuable time. For those of you on our call today that have worked with us in the past, you know that adding value to our clients and helping to grow successful businesses is a top priority for the Headhunters team. For those of you new to us, we're very glad that you've joined us. Our theme today is how to tap into free money with business grants. As a business owner myself, I know that lack of funds can be a real barrier to growing your business. But I've always kind of questioned, is there such a thing as free money out there? A lot of the business professionals I've worked with describe grants as really being too difficult to chase down. We know that they're out there, but it's really hard to access them. But it's really important for-profit businesses to learn about the programs that are out there and be corrected on the misconceptions about government grants. The Headhunters and Temps Ahead have invited Stephanie Sang, CEO of Granted Consultant, to talk with us today about how to develop an effective grant strategy for your business and how to be successful in applying for grants. Some of our clients at the Headhunters have used Stephanie's services very successfully, and we think this will be a real value add for you. Stephanie is known as a grant angel in Vancouver. She's really passionate about working with entrepreneurs in all industries on developing grant strategies for growth. And I think that's a really key point, is grant strategies for growth. Since 2011, Granted has supported 700 plus clients, generated over $10 million in grant funding at a success rate of 90%. Over the last few years, Stephanie has been invited to speak at a variety of events and venues to educate entrepreneurs about grants in Canada. We'll have a time for question and answers after Stephanie's 30-minute presentations. Just type your questions into the chat panel on your screens, and we'll address your questions at the end of the session. So with that, very pleased to introduce to you today's guest, Stephanie Sang.
Great, thank you, Cam, for that introduction. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Wanted to start off by thanking Headhunters for inviting us, Granted, to present on this, because part of our mission at Granted is also to educate businesses on grant programs that are available. A lot of people have come to us because they either did not know of specific grants that were available, never heard of grants for small, medium-sized businesses. So I thought it might be interesting to start off with a polling question. And I believe the polling, you should be able to access the polling questions from your screen. But we'll start off with the first one, which is, what are the biggest barriers that you feel exist when applying for grants? And so it's a multiple choice question with a few different options. If you guys
sorry, Steph, to interrupt. We're just having a technical issue with the polling question, so we'll maybe address that in just a couple of minutes.
We'll skip that for now. I apologize. We'll just go straight into the agenda then, and Cam, when things are ready to go, then we can go to the polling questions later. All right. So today's agenda, pretty simple. There'll be a quick introduction to who we are at Granted Consulting. We're going to be talking a little bit about when is the best time to apply for grants, what makes for a successful grant application, and then what are the different things that the government would be looking for when they're looking to support a business. So what are the grant factors involved? We will discuss specific grants that exist for this government fiscal year, which will be launching on Saturday. So April 1st is the government fiscal year start. We'll go through some case studies and what the impact has been for businesses that we have worked with. I've just selected 3 companies that we will go over just to give you an idea and tie in the concepts that we're going to be covering today. And then we will jump into Q&A. So Who we are. I always like to start this off with a little bit of a story, just some background on myself as the founder of the company. So I was born and raised in Vancouver. I graduated from SFU in market research, and I had moved to Asia in year 2000 after the whole dot-bomb situation. I was involved in that as well because I was working for a technology company, and moved into a manufacturing company in Taiwan. And it was at that company that we were doing the transition from manufacturing automotive components to transitioning into a medical component manufacturer. During that time, it was around 2007, 2008, a lot of new machinery had to be purchased. We had to hire a lot of different new staff members who had a completely different level of knowledge when it came to manufacturing, especially medical components. We also need to bring in some quality experts in the field to teach us specific things to do with the quality systems and how to maintain and sustain the manufacturing in medical components. So we had applied as a manufacturer in Taiwan for funding that was available, and that was my first kind of connection with grants in about 2007, 2008. And by 2010, we had successfully applied for over $3 million in grant funding and or 0% interest loans that carried the company, and now the company is in pre-IPO. So this story is just to tell you a little bit about, my grant expertise really started at that point in time, thinking that an island the size of Vancouver Island, if you guys are familiar with Vancouver Island, is able to access millions of dollars of grant funding. I came back to Canada in 2010, not knowing, how I would jump back into the workforce. And I thought, there's probably some opportunity here to look at grant funding and tax credits and whatnot. My mom works for CRA, so that also may tell some people about a different type of mindset that I may have when it comes to taxes and things like that. But I really, dug deep into where are the grant programs specifically for-profit businesses, so nonprofits and charities aside, and trying to find opportunities for my own family members who are all entrepreneurs, as well as some family, some friends as well. And so that's how Granted started. It was really, oh, thanks, Steph. I love knowing that there's a grant available out there, but I don't have time to apply for it. Or I'm looking through this application guide and it's 60 pages and I don't know how to really navigate through it. So that was a key point for Granted, is we identified that niche and moved forward with it. In terms of what's available for Canadian businesses, just quantitatively, there's about $7 billion in grants and tax credits. Now, I will tell you that the statistic is a little bit old. To be honest, I haven't actually seen a clear statistic in the last 2 years. So this is a 2013 statistic that came out in 2014 that spoke on what that number is. But my guess is it's probably closer to $8 or $9 billion now. The grant and tax credits that exist are specifically for businesses as well. And it's about half-half. So we're looking at about $3.5 billion in tax credits and about $3.5 billion in grants. And that's across Canada. Our strengths at Granted are in hiring, training, and market expansion grants. So our focus is not in the technology, but we'll cover some of that today. The technology grants when you're doing some R&D or university research grants, nor in private funding, which might be things like nonprofit or community-based funding. Okay. So just to start off, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section. I'm going to roll through the presentation and we'll do all the Q&A at the end. But let's start off as to when to apply for grants. So research and development, although this is not our forte, of course, we need to know of these grants, so we're going to cover it in the presentation today. The NRC stands for the National Research Council, and they have a pool of funding that supports businesses that are invested in R&D. So let's define what R&D means, because I get that question all the time as well. So R&D really specifically is you're innovating a process or a product that really isn't available here in Canada, or it might not even be available internationally. We're really looking at from the start to finish, so not looking at things where there might already be a pre-platform like a WordPress, and you're creating your own website. At maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that would have been considered innovative, that you're using WordPress to build your website. But these days, it seems pretty standardized. So the level of R&D also continues to progress along the continuum, and so looking at your industry, what are the kind of the key things that are coming up in terms of problems or things that the market is looking for solutions for, and then you being able to research and develop a solution for the market. IRAP is funding that you could apply for through your provincial NRC advisor. And so each industry has a separate advisor that covers different industry needs. So if you're in food or if you're in manufacturing, there would be a different advisor for each, because each person would have a different expertise level. The funding starts at usually $30,000 to $50,000, but there's an opportunity to then reapply after you successfully applied the first time to about $100,000. MyTax is a research grant as well as NSERC, where you're bringing in kind of semi-skilled workers where they are currently in school, either through a bachelor's or a master's or doctorate program, and they're helping to facilitate the R&D that you're looking to use in your business. In terms of tax credits, SHRED, this stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development Fund. SHRED is quite well known in the technology industries, but it is also available for other industries as well. So if you're in manufacturing or if you're in food, there's a variety of different ones, like medical as well, where you can tap into SHRED tax credits. These are tax credits though, so you apply for them at the end of your fiscal year, so your incorporated fiscal year, and you apply through CRA. There are SHRED consultants out there. We are not one of them, but if you have questions or whatnot about that, we're happy to send you off to a good contact that we may have in your province. And then media tax credits. So this varies a little bit by province as well. In BC, we have the interactive tax media credit, which essentially helps to offset about 11% of the expenses associated with R&D in interactive media. Innovative product or process. This might be a little bit more industry specific. There are programs that are launched kind of throughout the year that may address certain priorities that the federal government may have. This particular year, it definitely a strong emphasis in food. So agri-innovation is one. If a company is in farming, growing, or in food production, there's an opportunity to apply for funding to support, and in this case, capital expenditures are included, but this is a grant plus loan. So there are components where it could be granted, and then there are components where it's a loan. Usually the capital expenditures, like buying machinery and systems and things like that, kind of fall into the loan area. Clean tech, another strong very strong emphasis on clean tech this year from the federal government as well. The budget will be launching April 1st, and so we will get specifics in terms of what types of funding is available there. But in Western Canada recently, through the Western Diversification Fund, they've also expanded clean tech to include some R&D types of expenses associated with developing a product specific to the market. So there might be some funding available there by way of 0% interest loans. Project related, I'm going to kind of go through this one really quickly, but just to let you know that the government is not there to be a crutch for businesses. It really is trying to help facilitate interesting projects or pilot projects that companies are engaging in where there is some risk. So there's a risk of failure often, and that's what the government is looking to say, hey, yeah, we see that what you're doing could be interesting. We understand that it may bear a little bit of risk to your company, so we'll put some money into that. It's not for companies to rely on, grants are not for companies to rely on so that they can just tap into the funding year after year for the same people, for the same things. So that's one thing that to be aware of. It really is kind of pilot project driven, and there may be some operational costs that may be eligible, and they really have to do with specifically costs associated with the project itself. So let's say, for example, you bring in a new researcher to facilitate a new pilot project that you're running. Part of their wages may be covered, and only the time that they have dedicated to the particular project that has been approved. Okay, so in terms of when to apply for grant funding, we also continue now with more specific grants to hiring, training, market expansion. We're looking at employment grants, and often we get questions about what type of employee can I bring on that would qualify for a grant? And the answer is full-time. They need to be full-time. Whether or not they are permanent employees depends on the program itself. It is possible to have them on a T4, but maybe it's a contract for 6 months or 10 months. So each program has a little bit of a different rule set when it comes to that. But part-time and contractors likely would not qualify for funding unless they are wrapped into some type of a project. So say, for example, if you are engaged in, and we'll talk a little bit about a market expansion project, and you're bringing on a PR contractor who's helping you with PR in a country that you're expanding into. Maybe some of their expenses would be covered, but it's again related to the project as opposed to bringing them on the onset for hiring purposes. The improving skills, there is, and sorry, I should probably mention the grants that we will cover today are going to be largely federal. There are some provincial grants that vary by province, but my understanding is there's participants throughout Western Canada in this call today. So we're going to make it relatively more generic and talk about Canadian grants that your companies would be eligible for. So in the training grant, there's a grant called the Canada Jobs Grant. It is administered on a provincial level. Currently, the Saskatchewan and Manitoba intakes are closed until the new fiscal year launches in April. But BC and Alberta are currently open for specific intake dates. So if you are looking to upskill yourself in BC, and I'm very specific to that because you may be a business owner and you're looking to take a particular course or go to a conference. BC has some unique rules that allows business owners to participate in this training grant. In Alberta, you cannot be a business owner, you have to be sending your staff. So again, each province will have its different rules. Unfortunately, because of time restrictions, we won't be able to go through each and every single province, but just know that there are some differentiating factors there. Saskatchewan also does not allow business owners to apply for their own training, but staff, absolutely, but Manitoba does. So it's just all kind of vary throughout the different provinces. This training grant will go into a little bit more detail, but training grants in general are for upskilling. It's the understanding from the government in terms of what the needs are for a particular province, and especially for growth purposes, where are the skill sets that are needed for the next 10 years, for instance. So these training grants are there to support that by sending staff to apprenticeship programs or maybe university programs or just a specific university course or even private training providers who could come in and teach your staff as a group certain things about leadership or management or marketing. So there's a variety of different ways you can tap into this. And another time to apply for grants would also then be in market expansion. So if you are establishing a partnership internationally, looking to combine a couple of different knowledge, skill sets that will eventually lead to development of a product or service, there might be opportunities there. Also, if you're looking to expand your sales into an international country that you have not provided services to in the past. Recently, Alberta has launched a program and it can support kind of a micro amount. It's between $1,000 and $20,000, but to do with exporting. So you're looking at exporting into a new country, your products or services, and it's called the Export Support Fund. And that's relatively recent, but in general, federally, there's a program called Can Export, which supports up to $100,000 per government fiscal year. So in terms of what makes for successful applications, the key thing is to establish your goals. The idea with grants is that you're not trying to say, oh, here's a grant, let me find a way to fit my needs into that grant. it actually goes the other way around. So it's really key that you're looking at what your needs are for your company for the year, or maybe for the next year, and you're establishing what those goals are. And then the next step of research is then important, because you want to research against those specific goals. You want to take a look at what programs are there to, let's say, for example, you're looking to hire someone. So what grants are available out there to hire, and when are they available, and what type of person are you needing to hire in order to qualify? What are the eligibility requirements for your business in order to qualify? Some programs will say startup businesses cannot apply for hiring grants because you guys are startups, so there's some risk there. Other programs will say you need a minimum of 5 employees. So there's different things that you need to understand about eligibility. It could also be industry specific as well, so don't get too excited when you have a food company come to you and say, oh, I got a $20,000 grant for hiring a young person who just graduated from the university. Excuse me. And you can do it as well. That's actually not the case. It's very industry specific, so you need to look at that. In terms of commitment, probably really important to recognize, especially as a small business, whether or not the commitment is going to be something that you can bear, because some programs will have some reporting requirements that are really quite specific. And you might need an accountant to help you out with that. So if you're applying for a grant, and let's say it's a $1,000 grant, but it requires 3 or 4 reports, just bear that in mind and see if that return on investment is worth it for you. Excuse me. So on to what makes for the next, what makes for a successful application would be, what is the program looking for? This is key. We've had people come to us and say, we're very interested in expanding internationally. And sorry, just one second. I'm just going to take a sip of water. Sorry about that. So a company comes to me and says, we're looking to expand internationally. We go into a conversation with them about what are the activities that they're going to be ensuing and pursuing. And they talk about all the different things that they're doing in New Brunswick or in Ontario. And the last I checked, both of those provinces are still in Canada. So what, different government programs are very specific in terms of, okay, we're looking for a company that is looking to expand. They have not exported or they have not shipped products to a particular country in the past. And they have they're looking to grow their staff as well as increase revenues in Canada. Let's say that's their criteria. You need to make sure that when you're preparing an application, you're addressing those key points. You don't want to be talking about all the amazing things you're doing locally unless it somehow ties into your strategy for developing the market internationally. You need to be able to tie those concepts together. So it's important that when you are looking to prepare an application, that you address what they are looking for. And deadlines and planning ahead is probably key. I mentioned earlier that startup companies may not qualify for funding at this point in time, or some programs are a little bit more restrictive, but that doesn't mean next year you wouldn't qualify. So taking a look at different programs, one of my pet peeves is when a company comes to me in like mid-March and says, oh, I just hired someone. Is there a grant program available? And I'm like, oh, has this person started? And it's like, oh, they started last week. Well, there is a program that would be available, but it doesn't launch for another 2 weeks. So had you been able to wait a couple of weeks, potentially we would have been able to get you $13,000. So it's things like that that just kind of irk me just as a grant consultant. I'm like, oh, I wish I could have had an opportunity to connect with this person beforehand and let them know, because that is part of it. It's understanding where and when the buckets of money drop, and then how you can tap into it and leverage it, and when you should be waiting for the next intake so that you're not necessarily missing out if you have some leeway when it comes to, say, for example, hiring or some of the training grants. Okay, grant factors. We're going to breeze through this slide pretty quickly. Number of employees is often a factor. Startups, if you are 2 business owners applying for a grant, you just need to be aware that some programs are a little bit more picky when it comes to that. They just want to make sure that you have the time to bring on a new person, or the training that you're applying for, that it doesn't take you away from the business too much. Industry, I mentioned earlier as well. you're taking a look at different industries. We want to make sure that you are looking at the grants for your specific industry, that there is a fit for the different activities that you're proposing. So we breezed on that a little bit earlier as well. Your track record. So I noticed that there are some people here in the chat room right now who are mentioning things like the Canada Jobs Grant. So that's a training grant that we had mentioned, which covers some funding to help support your staff for training. That track record is actually vital, especially here in BC. We've seen companies been blacklisted because they have not completed their reporting requirements from last year. So just be aware that the government is the government. They have access to a lot of information. And so whether or not they can share between different programs, you know, who knows whether or not they do that or not. So making sure that you do complete your reporting, that you have the resources before you apply for a grant. Most grants are a matching grant, so it might be a 50% type of grant. And then also for financial security, looking at not relying on grant funding to run your business. Really the key thing is to be able to take a look at your goals and match up the different grant programs, but not to say, oh, if I don't get this grant, I'm going to be bankrupt. Though that's not going to work because that's not sustainable long term, and it puts a heavy risk on government tax dollars, which probably isn't the best, seeing that we're all taxpayers here. So one final thing I'm going to mention is putting Canada on the map. So this one is a new bullet point that I added to the slide last year. I've noticed the competitiveness with some of these market expansion programs really relies on whether or not what you're doing in terms of product or process and your service that you're providing is innovative. And if it's something that is unique and it's different. So I often say with the Can Export program, for instance, if you're manufacturing pencils, there's got to be a very good reason as to why the government would want to give you additional funding to expand. But maybe this pencil is, you know, very unique in the way that it's used, and it's the, you know, a very specific manufacturing process that's used that really kind of highlights that innovative component to Canada. So when these different organizations are looking at these programs, they're going to look at that as well. It's really important to kind of point out where your differentiating factor is when you are applying for any grant. Okay. So here are some grant links and specifics. So we talk about IRAP and CERC and MyTax. I see some notes in here as well in the chat room. The Concierge, the NRC Concierge, is who I usually point my clients to or prospects who are interested in these type of tech development grants. And this Concierge link should be able to take you to the right contact person within your province to have a discussion with. The key thing with having discussions with the NRC Concierge is you need to be prepared. You should know what it is that you want to do, have a quasi idea of what your budget is. So don't go in unprepared just saying like, oh, I want to develop this. I don't know how much it's going to cost. I don't know how many people I'm going to need. I don't know what the economic benefit could potentially be. You want to go in with a little bit of a story, and what they are more concerned about is more the research and development side than the market side. So they want to see how are they able to support getting your product or process to market or your service to market, as opposed to what's going to happen after it's developed and then what the market potential is. So just be careful with that because their focus is more on the R&D side of things. Canada Jobs Grant, one program that I know of at this point in time, although other provincial programs, you know, kind of may cater towards, like I know in Ontario, they have a program for rural areas of Ontario, Northern Ontario, where they have a specific training grant that's a little bit different from this one. Quebec has its own training grant as well. But the Canada Jobs Grant, 2/3 of the cost of training to a maximum of $10,000 per person per government fiscal year. So what that means is if I'm taking a training that is $6,000, the government could potentially cover up to $4,000. Now, as a business owner, you should know if you're sending your staff, most of these programs will require that the cost of the training is paid in full before you can make a claim. So if you're paying for somebody's MBA, which I've seen happen as well, just know that you might not see a check for 3 to 6 months, depending on which province you're in. Youth hiring. I've made this relatively broader because I can't list out all the different links and grants that are available, but you know, some of these are industry specific, like the apparel grant, biotech and technology, and then some of them are very specific to a particular position, like the digital position, and technology also falls into you know, a very specific skill set type of one. But most of these hiring grants are geared towards people who are under the age of 30 and they have a diploma or a degree, and it's kind of like they're a little bit more green, so they want companies to take them under their wing and give them a valuable work experience as one of their first or second jobs. So that's really important as well. The Opportunities Fund has launched last year, and it is for people who have disabilities. So previously it was very specific to a industry, and then they opened it up to all industries. And all of these programs that I'm mentioning here are federal programs. Most of them I am expecting to see launch in April or May, with the exception of the digital one. The digital one just kind of comes and goes when it wants. So last year it launched in July, and then they topped off again in February. So it totally depends on, you know, where they're going with it. And again, if you have specific provincial programs that you're looking at, then I'm not covering that in today's presentation. One other federal program that you guys should all be aware of is the Canada Summer Jobs Program. You cannot apply for it this year. The intake is over, but you should look for it this December, because that's when it will open again. And it covers about half of minimum wage for students. So students being high school students or university students who are looking for a job in the May to August timeframe, where they have a break from their post-secondary studies. If they're high school students, then it's limited to an 8-week placement. And you can get multiple spots for that. Nonprofits can get up to 90% covered. For-profit businesses, 50% of minimum wage. Next one, agri-foods. Just really briefly, some marketing and innovation ones specifically for the agri-food industry, where you are able to, in BC as well as internationally, be able to, or sorry, domestically, be able to tap into funding where it takes you into new marketplaces. So if you are a food company that is exporting to Europe, especially with the new European trade agreement that was recently signed, you might want to look into programs that that would be able to support, you know, attendance to trade shows, or bringing on someone to help facilitate more of a market presence in the new country that you're looking at. And finally, the International Export Program. This is called the Can Export Program, which is different from the Export Support Fund, which is available in Alberta only. The Can Export Program, there is a threshold for it to apply. You need to have had $200,000 in revenues in 2016. They look at your GST return, and you have to have been in business for at least 2 years. So the requirement is that you are looking to export your product or service into a country that you have not exported to in the last 2 years. So if you've already done business in the US is, you can't apply, but you can apply for Europe, or you can apply for a country in Europe, or a country in Asia, or South America, whatnot. So this program is one that is about $100 million in funding. It launched January of 2016, so we've got another 3 years of funding left or so. The turnaround time for an application decision is about 6 to 8 weeks, so not too long, but it is mandatory that you apply at least 8 weeks in advance of your travels or your activities that you're looking for. It is also a reimbursement process, so it's a matching fund, meaning you have to put in the money, pay for the expenses, and then make your claim for the 50% once those activities are done. Okay. Grant impact. So this is, I've been asked to put together slides that talk specifically about things that companies have done with us. This is an example of a small food processing firm. They were smaller when we started off, but as you can see here, in terms of what type of funding they've been able to leverage, up to almost $100,000. And I think we're going to be doing a little bit more with them this year as well, also by way of training and export, as well as local marketing here in BC. The impact, though, is a little bit staggering. So you can see the revenues in 2013, after tapping into their first hiring subsidy, was only about $80,000. They've grown tenfold revenue-wise. So it's interesting how a little bit of injection of funding, especially getting that first employee or that seventh employee or whatever it is, or some extra training that really pushes your management team up a level, has really impacted, or how it can impact a business. Job creation, 3 different people have gotten jobs as a result, and currently they're at 5 full-time employees. Second one, I get this all the time. Oh, I'm a small convenience store on the corner of downtown. There's no way there's grant funding. Well, here's a way. A small coffee shop, 7 employees. They are a coffee shop franchise here in BC. I speak about BC because that's where we largely started off, but we are now increasing our services into the rest of the provinces in Western Canada. And we've been doing business in Alberta and Manitoba the last year or so. So with this particular one, it's the same hiring program, which piloted in 2011, and then we tapped into it over and over again because we had such a strong track record with these delivery organizations. Instead of just securing 2 or 3 spots, we were able to secure up to 5 spots. And so some of these delivery organizations are kind of reliant on us to say, hey, we've got this really good employer. They need like 8 people. Can you give a few more spots? And they're like, oh yeah, we'll give you another 3. So it's that relationship that also is nice to establish with these delivery organizations that are managing these programs on behalf of the government. $71,000 over 6 years. And the impact, you know, their revenue growth is relatively consistent. It's at 8%, but you can see the $71,000 went back into the pocket of the business owner, and it was for people they were going to be hiring anyway. And then a consulting business. So I always like to talk products, and then I like to talk services. So this is a service-based company, tapped into grants throughout the life of the company, and to a tune of about $72,000, mainly in the hiring and training space. And in terms of impact, doubled the revenues almost every year since. So job creation, 8 people hired in total, some on grants, others not, but in total 8 as a result of grants. So I don't know if the polling questions are up, but maybe you guys can, I'll give you one polling question that I'm actually really kind of interested in getting some feedback on. And it is which category of grants mentioned in today's...
Excuse me, Steph.
Okay.
The polling, we had a technical glitch with it, so we're just going to ask the questions as we go through.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So
can we start off with, well, start with the first question then, is what are the biggest barriers when applying for grants? So I don't know if someone can tap into the chat. I just don't want to be tapping and talking at the same time. But the first option is that you didn't know about which grants or didn't know that grants existed for businesses. The second is that you've applied, but you've applied unsuccessfully for grants in the past, and you don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole again. Third is that you find it time consuming. You know that they're out there. You've heard about them. People told you to apply for it, but you just don't have the time for it. D is you're apprehensive about working with government grants. You're like, oh, they might audit me, and they might you know, have different ways of finding out things that I've not done right in my business. So I don't want the government to see all this. E is none of the grants that you've identified are relevant to your business. And so you've identified them, you have the time to apply for it, but you've just decided there's nothing really out there that really fits, or F, if there's another reason. So that's one thing that that's one question that I'd like to just kind of have you guys put in your answers. Again, what is your biggest barrier for applying for grants? A, do not know which grants are available. B, applied unsuccessfully in the past. C, time consuming. D, apprehensive about government applications in general. E, no grants are relevant. And F, other. Okay. A second question is, we covered this already, but how much grant funding did you guys think would be available from the Government of Canada? People are often quite surprised that it's to a tune of $7 billion. I was when I first saw that, and that was back in 2013. But maybe you guys can speak a little bit on that. Also, if you have applied for grant funding in the past, and I saw some chats talking about this as well. Which types of grants have you guys applied for? So A, hiring, B, training, C, market expansion or exporting, D, R&D, E, other, or F, none.
Hey, Steph, we're sorry to interrupt again. We're just getting a ton of responses on the Q&A side. So, do you mind if we kind of jump into that, and I'll ask you a few of the questions that we're seeing.
Let's
Great,
go for it.
Thanks. This is from Vancouver. It's what program is used for upskilling for a CEO, and what program is used for hiring subsidies for hiring a manager in my company?
Okay, so upskilling a CEO would be the Canada Jobs Grant, or in BC, it would be the BC Jobs Grant. Business owners in BC do qualify. So if the CEO is a business owner as well, or the owner of the business, they may qualify. There are specific restrictions to industries in BC, so it's probably best to connect with us and just find out whether or not your company would qualify. But if you're under 50 employees, the chances are you're good. In terms of hiring a manager, so I think it depends on what type of business you are. If you're a manager of a retail store and you're okay with hiring someone who's under the age of 30, then some of these hiring grants that I mentioned in the presentation may be applicable. We just recently helped a company hire, it was a retail store for clothing, men's clothing. They hired a manager at age 28 with a bachelor's degree in fashion, and they were able to access this funding, and it was about $15,000 of wage subsidies, which covered half of their wages for the first year or first 10 months. In terms of other types of hiring grants for people who are a little bit more seasoned, there is another program through EI, and it helps people get their feet, but get them back into the workforce essentially. Either they're coming off a EI claim through mat leave or paternal leave. You would need to work with the Work BC, or in Alberta, I think there's a different name for it, but these different employment centers in order to identify the right candidate. You might also receive a resume from someone who is coming off EI, and at that point, it might be good to engage in someone in these employment centers nearby to see if there could be funding that supports half of their wages for the first 26 weeks. Okay.
Great, thank you. Here's another one from Edmonton. It says, can you apply to both Can Export and Alberta Export grants?
My recommendation, I believe that you can apply to both. They're mutually exclusive in that way. But my recommendation is that you apply for different things. So take a look at what the requirements of the export fund is for Alberta first, because that one seems to be a little bit more lenient in terms of what what market you're going into. It doesn't have very specific restrictions in terms of revenues and things like that. So tap into that. I would say tap into that one first, and then apply for the other one. Now, the key thing though is if you do the export one with Alberta and you've already established a sale, so let's say for example in the US, then it makes you now ineligible the next month because for the Can Export program, because you cannot have made a sale or sold products to the country of interest within the last 2 years. So just make sure that you're strategic in kind of how you're leveraging both programs.
Great, and back to the upskill for CEOs, owners. This question comes from Alberta. It says, can a CEO owner apply for an upskill grant in Alberta?
Can a CEO apply for an upskill grant in Alberta? The answer to that is depends on, sorry, my screen's just kind of gone here. It depends on whether or not the CEO has ownership in the company. If they do, then likely not, because in Alberta, they're pretty strict about that. Also, the CEO obviously has authority in terms of making decision-making on a day-to-day basis for the operations of the business, and that would also make them ineligible.
Great. Another question was, in terms of me being a startup company, what do I need to prepare for my strategy and getting my grant strategy put together?
Yeah, so that's a great question because we really want people and business owners to realize that if they don't qualify right now, they could qualify in the next year or so. So a couple of things to look at is probably you're bringing on your first new hire. You might want to look at building some time or capacity to train up someone. That would probably be important. So you look at grant programs that will be taking place in like April, May, around that time frame, and kind of be ready for those hiring programs when they do launch. And take a look at what programs have been in existence in the last few years, and you can probably kind of find some connection points at that, in terms of whether or not your company would be a fit. The training one, I think, is one of the best grants that companies have applied for. Not only because they, obviously there is money out of your pocket in this. They're not paying 100% of your training fees, but really what these training providers are able to provide is another point of view or another skill set that your business obviously doesn't have time to provide to your current staff. So that's another one that I would say if you're in BC, you want to look at the BC Jobs Grant. If you're in Alberta, then you really want to start looking at some hiring grants to start off with. And then as your company grows, let's say you're at 2 or 3 years, you've established some strong revenues, you're at 6 figures, then definitely looking at the Can Export to expand your products or services internationally would be the next step.
Great, thank you. Getting some good feedback too on, had one from, I believe it's from Manitoba. It says, I had no idea there was so much grant money available. So really going to start doing some research on this. Had another question, probably from a business owner here. It says, how do you charge for your services? I don't know if you want to address that right now or maybe do that offline.
Well, I'm happy to do it. I mean, we largely work on a contingency fee basis, but we do take a small deposit of $300 to $500 up front just to keep everybody committed to the game. And so depending on the grant, we have different structures as well, because some of these market expansion grants do not allow for a contingency fee, or the fee structure has to be modified a little bit, but essentially our fee rate ranges between 15% to 25% based on the grant funding that's secured. So my point of view when I started this business is I don't want to be paying anyone to unsuccessfully help me apply for a grant, right? So we rely really on our track record to support that. It's kind of like I don't want to pay a lawyer if they're going to lose my court case. So my accountant will tell you, and if you have accountants on the call, they will probably agree that's probably not the best way of sustaining growth in your company, but we've been being able to do it successfully and grow kind of our tree of clients because we are able to prove our success. So we're comfortable with putting our time and effort into the game so long as you guys are committed.
Thank you. Now here's one from Vancouver. It says, we've applied and received 2 grants from Canada BC Job Grant. We wanted to hire a company last year to install our ERP system. Our application was to have the company do the training for our departments, but we were denied because the company doing the training did not have a website page saying they did the training.
Yes.
We had a full quote for training from the CEO of the company. How can we try again to get the grant? Any tips? We did ask the ERP company to add a web page, but they said they wouldn't.
Yeah. It's interesting. The BC Jobs Grant, and we're very familiar with this one as well as Alberta one as well, has been the most the one program that we've seen with the most changes. So since the inception of the program's changed about 58 times. This year alone, it's changed 9 times. So I just wanted to let you guys know, like this type of stuff, if you guys love changes and, and are okay with those, then grants, you guys should be working for granted as well. But or working on your own grants, I should say. I would say that the restrictions have gotten a lot stricter. It's probably, if the training provider does not have a website with that information, it's probably going to be unlikely that they can get funding. There's a couple of different ways. We could probably take it offline that I can give you some suggestions. So maybe just connect with me after the presentation and we can have a quick chat about that and see.
Great, thank you. And another question was, what was the name of the business grant for business owners? I missed the name.
The business grant for business owners to get training, it would be the BC, for Canada, for the training grant, it's the BC Jobs Grant that makes business owners eligible. I'm not too sure in what arena, training, hiring, marketing expenditure. I mean, all of these are for businesses,
Yeah.
all for profit. But the one that I can think of that I mentioned that is specifically for business owners to apply for would be only specifically here in BC and potentially in Manitoba as well. But that would be the Canada Jobs Grant or BC Jobs Grant if you're in BC, Manitoba Job Grant if you're in Manitoba.
Great, thank you. And we will have these slides all out to everyone tomorrow. So and you can access Stephanie's website as well. So it will all be available by the end of the day tomorrow.
Okay, perfect.
Here's one more. It says, would an ERP implementation count as a project-related grant?
It depends for which industry. I know that there are specific grants, like let's say, for example, in agri-innovation, where they would consider that as a continuum of some sort. Recently in BC, they've launched something like a traceability program where ERP systems might have an effect on that. So it would be some capital expenditure that might tie in your quality system with your ERP system somehow. And more of an add-on, like I said, it's kind of more specific to that. There used to be a program, and I'm going to mention this because who knows if the Liberals will come back with it. But it was through the NRC as well. I think it was actually a subset of the IRAP program, which did pay for implementation of systems and processes, including CRM systems and ERP systems. The reason why this program was nixed was because not enough people applied for it. You get that? But then it's so funny because I tell people, oh yeah, you're doing that? Oh, there was a grant for that about a year ago. And they're like, what? So, and it was to a tune of $50,000 for implementation of systems. So if you guys are, like for Headhunters, for instance, your systems, if your internal systems or whatnot that you might be building in to connect with different offices and whatnot, they would have paid for the implementation of that type of system and the cost of it. So I can't tell you that it will be back. It was a 2013 program. It piloted for a year and failed. And so who knows if they're going to bring it back again.
Where were you 2 years ago?
Yeah, I know. Sorry, guys.
Here's another one. This one's from Alberta. It says, what defines being in a particular province? Certain companies operate in multiple provinces, but are based out of one province.
Excellent question. So with federal grants, it doesn't matter quite as much, but with some of these provincially administered grants, they look at where your business registration exists. So if you have an ACAN number, that's your Alberta corporation number, then you would be Alberta. If you are usually in, let's say, for example, you start off in Alberta and then you've done an extra provincial registration, that's what they call it in BC, that shows that you have registered your business in BC as well. So your BC staff would go under BC, your Alberta staff would go under ACAN, your Manitoba staff would go under whatever corporate registry is there. So that's how they look at it. There are also some interprovincial agreements as well when it comes to some of these programs. They look at largely where the person resides. So say, for example, you have someone and they have to be, let's say, for example, the training grant, you have a sales staff member who's in BC, but your operations is in Alberta. So you would actually, for the Alberta Jobs Grant, they will not allow you to apply for this candidate because they don't reside in Alberta. So there are some interprovincial ones that you can then take your ACAN number and say, hey, we are registered, here's our business license in BC. That would be good enough as well because you need that to operate. And then to say our incorporation is actually from Alberta and apply for that staff member's training from BC. Great.
And one more, do you know of a grant for youth under 18 years old?
Under 18, the only one that I'm aware of in Alberta, I don't know even if the STEP grant allows for under 18. Usually they want the kids under 18 to focus on their studies. I know I want my kids to focus on their studies. But hiring grants, probably the Canada Summer Jobs Grant is the best one to bring someone on. And so they are, they're in school still, they have to be 15 and up, but then they would only cover, the time that they're working over the summer for their summer break. So if their break starts in June, late June, then they will cover from that point till the end of August, but they will not allow for high school students, for example, to tap into this program if it means they're going to cut school.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And I think, just respectful of everyone's time, we do need to wrap up at this point. Really really appreciate all this information, Stephanie. And I tell you, back to being a business owner, I really know that time is really tight when you're trying to run a business, and having that kind of grant money out there just waiting to be accessed by using a company like Granted, I just, that's why we began using them a couple of years ago. It's very, very important just to go with the experts. So we will be sending out an email with all the details plus a recording of today's webinar. It'll be posted on our website, www.theheadhunters.ca. Feel free to share that. If you are interested in hearing more about business grants, how they can help you in your business, and certainly if you'd like some help on recruitment needs, you can either contact your local recruiter at the Headhunters. We will have the granted information on the site tomorrow for sure. And Stephanie, we really appreciate all the time that you've taken to put this together. Obviously a topic of a lot of information, a lot of interest, and thanks so much for your time. One last piece is we will have our next webinar comes up on April 22nd. The topic is how to terminate employees, the do's and the don'ts. Dr. Howie Outerbridge of Logan HR will be presenting. Hope you can join us for that one. And again, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to address them to our website.
Great. Well,
thanks very much, everyone.
For attending. Have a great day.